So we are about 3 weeks until the October LSAT, about 23 days. And that's a ton of time. For others, that might not feel like a whole lot of time at all. Maybe you're terrified, maybe you're excited, maybe a mix of both. The truth is that 3 weeks is a good amount of time to make big gains if you're focused, but it's also close enough that every single study choice matters. So today, I'm going to walk you through exactly what to focus on between now and test day, how to structure your final practice tests, what not to waste time on, and how to handle those sections that still feel shaky. And most importantly, how to build confidence so you don't burn out right before the big day. Now, a lot of you may have heard about my laser approach to LSAT prep. LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. Now, learning is the foundational phase where you're reading textbooks, watching videos, learning the theory. Hopefully, you are well past that stage by now. A is for accuracy, drilling questions by type to get the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. Hopefully, you're past that stage as well. You don't want to be going over the basics of logical reasoning questions like necessary assumption, sufficient assumption in the final days. At this point, you want to focus on individual timed sections, exams and endurance, doing full-length timed practice tests, and review. So LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. We want to focus on the final 3 stages: sections, exams, and review. Ideally, you want to have done at least 10 full-length exams before the big day so that test day itself will feel like just another run-through. With 3 weeks before the October LSAT, you want to maybe do 2 exams a week for the next 3 weeks. That would give you 6 exams in total. Then on the days that you're not doing those full exams, you're doing individual sections to work on your pacing and your time management, and you want to review everything you do in detail using the Socratic review method. Now, if you're wondering, what is the Socratic review method? It is a framework that helps you drill down to exactly what is the root cause of the issues you're facing so that you can avoid making the same mistakes the next time around. So you're going to look, for example, was it your approach to the text or was it your understanding of the text itself? Was it a tempting wrong answer or was it an unappealing right answer? If you can get to the root cause, you can nip it in the bud and you won't make the same mistake again. Now, the Socratic review method is inspired by the Socratic method that you do in law school itself, where we're not going to give you the answer the way a book would or the way a video would, because we're not going to be there on test day. We can't take it for you. So we've got to give you the tools, the skills, the clarity, the confidence so that you can perform for yourself when it truly matters. And so we ask you these guiding questions live in coaching. And of course, you can adopt this process for your own self-study. The idea of the Socratic review method being, what exactly was it about my approach that led me to get the question wrong? Was it misunderstanding the question type? Was it misunderstanding the stimulus? Was it misunderstanding an answer choice, a tempting wrong answer or an unappealing right answer? Whatever the case may be, we want to get to the root cause so that we can avoid making the same mistake again. And if you got the question wrong, that is totally fine. You want to get it wrong now so that you don't get it wrong on test day itself when it truly matters. And so every single question that you get wrong is an opportunity to learn something new. Now, there are 15 different types of logical reasoning questions. You've also got reading comprehension as well. And then you have mistakes related to pacing, time management, and endurance. Now, out of those 15 types of logical reasoning questions, some are more important than others. The 3 most common types of logical reasoning questions are necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. Now, a lot of students hate parallel reasoning questions because they are lengthy, they are overly time consuming, and for that reason, you're always kind of wondering, oh my God, what is this? And what am I even reading here? The thing is that although they are lengthier, because every question is worth the same, you want to focus on the more common question types because you're going to get more bang for your buck understanding those thoroughly inside out than the rare types that come up a lot less often. And so again, the 3 most common types: necessary assumption, inference, and flaw. That is where you want to start. For necessary assumption, you want to make sure that you're crystal clear on the difference in approach between that and sufficient assumption questions. Necessary assumption questions contain words and phrases in the question stem synonymous with necessity, like depends upon, requires, and assumes. Sufficient assumption questions contain words and phrases in the question stem that aren't synonymous with sufficiency, like allows, enables, properly inferred if assumed, and properly drawn if assumed. But sufficient assumption questions are a lot less common than necessary assumption, so you want to focus on necessary assumption to start. Then you have your inference questions. Within that umbrella category, you have must be true and most strongly supported. Must be true questions demand 100% certainty. In contrast, most strongly supported questions demand 90, maybe 95% certainty, meaning the correct answer is incredibly likely to be the case based on the stimulus, but is not necessarily 100% guaranteed. It is like a very reasonable assumption. But again, these are one of the most common types as well, being inference, and so you want to make sure you master those as well. Finally, you have flaw questions where all they're asking you to do is to identify the flaw. That's it. Can you articulate what crime the argument is guilty of having committed? It could be confusing necessary and sufficient conditions. It could be confusing correlation and causation. It could be an ad hominem attack. It could be circular reasoning. There are plenty of these classic logical fallacies. And then, of course, there are plenty of flaws where the argument just failed to consider something. And you want to look for what exactly was that something. You ideally want to pre-phrase or predict that something, and then look for the description of that flaw in the answer choices. Then beyond that, of course, you have reading comprehension. Now, in reading comprehension, there is understanding the text and there's allocating time. Understanding the text means, what did the passage say? What is the main point? What is the author's opinion? If you could articulate the main point or central idea of the passage in one sentence as a prephrase, you would then be much more likely to identify LSAC's articulation of the main point in the answer choices when it comes up. Now, a lot of students will say, I hate science passages, or I hate humanities passages, or social science passages. The truth, of course, is that the topic should not matter, but sometimes it does. Now, how can you get away from the topic mattering? By focusing on the structure of the passage rather than the topic. There are a limited set of reading comprehension passage structures that LSAC loves to reuse again and again. For example, you have an old versus new distinction. You have theory A, theory B, and then a synthesis or combination or compromise between the two. There's a limited set of these. If you can familiarize yourself with them, then whenever you see a new passage in the future, you'll be able to group it into one of those buckets, and you'll be that much more likely to navigate the passage smoothly when it comes up. Now, you have order of approach in reading comprehension as well. You have three major types of questions in reading comp. You have global questions, local questions, and inferential questions. Global questions include main idea, primary purpose, passage organization, best title, tone, and author's opinion. You want to knock those out first. Those are your gimmies. Those are your warm-ups. Then you have local questions that are more detail-oriented in nature, like where the LSAC is asking you to go back to a specific section of the passage. And finally, you have your more inferential questions that require a bit more reading between the lines. I recommend saving those for last. So you start with your global questions as your warm-up, as your gimmies, just to set the stage for what the passage is going to be about. Then you have local, where you go back to specific lines in the passage supporting a given answer choice. And finally, you have your inferential that are the most time-consuming. These might include parallel questions. These might include strengthen or weaken questions that are bizarre and somewhat analogous to the similar types in logical reasoning. You save those for last because everything on the LSAT is worth the same. There's no reason to get bogged down or stuck or start off with anything harder. In contrast, you want to actually build your momentum with the easier questions to begin with. Then beyond logical reasoning, beyond reading comp, in terms of accuracy, you also have your pacing and time management. For logical reasoning, if you're aiming for 165 or above, which of course I recommend that you do, we want to solve the first 10 questions in roughly 10 to 12 minutes, building up a time bank that you can then apply to the tougher questions later in the section. Because every question's worth the same, you want to blast through the easy ones, trust your gut, and then build up that time banker buffer for the tougher ones later that truly demand the time, that truly need that time. In reading comprehension, you have an average of 8 minutes and 45 seconds for each passage set. That works out to roughly 3 minutes or so on your initial read of the passage, and then roughly 6 minutes to answer the questions associated. Of course, not all reading comprehension passages are of equal difficulty. Some are harder than others. And so you want to build up that time bank by blasting through the easier ones similarly to have more time for the tougher ones. So maybe an easier passage can and should take you 6 or 7 minutes. Yes, that is possible. And then you're going to have 11 or 12 minutes for the tougher passages later. You also want to build up your endurance before test day, doing several full-length timed practice tests so that test day itself is like just another run through. That means you're doing 4 section sittings back to back with only a 10-minute break between sections 2 and 3. Now, I know it's easier when you're working, when you're in school, when you're busy to do a section here, a section there, and then some students will be tempted to add those all together into one practice test score. But 4 individual sections does not make a full exam because of the endurance factor. Just like you can't do 26 separate 1-mile runs and say you've run a marathon, it just doesn't work that way. And so you can build up to a full exam by doing a section here, a section there. But at some point, sooner rather than later, you got to pull it all together and say, you know what? I'm going to carve out 2.5 hours to do 4 sections in one go with only that 10-minute break in the middle. I cannot emphasize this enough. Far too many students reach out to me after test day. I've never heard from them before, and suddenly they're saying to me, I don't know why I was PTing at a 170 on my practice tests, then I suddenly dropped down to 163 on test day. And it's because, more often than not, they did not do enough full exams. The typical student drops 5 to 8 points from their practice tests to the actual, and a large part of that reason is because those students never built up their endurance. And so you want to do at least 10 full-length exams before the big day. Speaking now, 3 weeks prior to test day, you could do 2 exams a week for the next 3 weeks. Today is Monday. Maybe you're going to do 1 full exam tomorrow and another one on Saturday, or you'll do 1 Wednesday and 1 Sunday. Just don't do them on consecutive days for the love of God, because we don't want you to burn out. If after you do 4 sections, your brain probably will be fried, and that is okay. If you do it again and again, ideally 5 or 6 of them at least, you will have built up your endurance so that it's not as big a deal. And so that test day rolls around, you've seen it all before. It's nothing new. And yeah, you might still be tired by the end, but at least it's not your first time having undergone that experience. Now, I'm going to be open up to comments and questions. If anyone has anything, just drop it in the chat. I've got a question here saying, what if I can't do 10 full exams before test day? You have 2 options here. You could either say to yourself, okay, well, I'm going to push it back to November or January, give myself more time to get more at-bats, or I'm going to say to myself, you know what? I'm going to do 5 exams before test day, and maybe that'll be enough. If you can get to a place where, let's say your goal is 170 for test day and your PT average going in is 170, 172, fantastic. You might get lucky, not experience that much of a drop, if any. You still hit your 170 on test day. Amazing. If not, no big deal. You can always retake in November, or worst case scenario, January. A lot of students wonder, is November too late? Is January too late? Not at all too late. Law school admissions is conducted on a rolling basis. So yes, law school officers have the option to evaluate applications as they come in, but they're also busy. They're traveling, they're touring around, they're marketing their schools, and all else being equal, it's better to apply earlier than later. But if you need another month or 2 to reach your full potential, it's better to apply later with a higher score than earlier with a lower score. And law schools do not average multiple LSAT scores. They only take the highest score on record. And so let's say your practice test average going into October was a 170, and sure enough, you hit a 170 on test day. Fantastic. But you might still want to take it in November because you could get lucky. There's a margin of error or a score band of roughly 3.5 points on each end, meaning if your true hypothetical score is a 170, you walk in on test day, you score 170 on the nose. Yeah, technically that's what you deserved. But if you retake in November, maybe you get a 173. Maybe you get a 174. If so, fantastic. You waited another month. You're now applying with a 174, which is at or above the LSAT medians of every single law school in the country, including the T14. Fantastic. A 170 is going to open up a lot more doors. Sorry, a 174 is going to open up a lot more doors than a 170 will. And if you scored worse in November, if you dropped a few points and hit a 166, no big deal, because you already have the 170 on record, and law schools only count the highest. And so for that reason, I recommend that everybody retake the LSAT at least once, meaning you're taking it officially at least twice, because there's no downside. It's just how the incentives are lined up. It's how the system is designed. And so why not take advantage of it? Now, I got a question here from Mike asking, where is the best place to find full practice exams? Hey, Mike, welcome. And so the best place is going to be LSAC's Law Hub platform. Law Hub, LAWHUB. It is by the Law School Admission Council. This is where they publish all the previously administered LSAT exams. There are 58 of them in the new LSAT format, minus the logic games. In the old format, back when logic games were on the exam, there were 94 numbered exams, plus a handful that are unnumbered. You can still find a lot of them in books of LSATs on Amazon for about $20 each, in books of 10 for the old format. LSAT is publishing them in the new format in books of only 3 exams each, a lot more expensive. And since the LSAT is now administered online on a computer through the Prometric platform, which is identical to Law Hub, I recommend not getting the books and instead using LSAC's Law Hub. You get 4 exams for free with your lsac.org account, and then you can get the other 54 or so numbered 101 to 158 in the new format for $120 a year in Law Hub Advantage. Well worth the investment. If you are in a financial needy situation, if you can demonstrate financial need, LSAC will grant you a fee waiver, in which case you'll get access to all of those for free. But again, even if you don't get the fee waiver, $120 is a drop in the bucket relative to the value of getting into a better law school, getting more scholarship money. Getting a higher LSAT is the easiest money you'll ever make. Well worth the investment to get the exams on Law Hub in the exact test day format. Jimena says, hi. Hi, Jimena. Welcome. Ashley says, besides continuing to practice, do you have any advice for staying focused on your last reading comp passage? I often get distracted by the limited time left and struggle to focus in the last 6-ish minutes. So the first issue here, I think, is that you're already behind when you get to the last passage. Ideally, you have about 9 minutes per passage, since you have 35 minutes to solve all 4 sets of passages. And so 8:45 on exactly per each set means you should have ideally 8-9 minutes when you get to that final passage. And so I think the initial step here is to go at a faster pace overall, so that you have 9, ideally even 10 minutes by the time you get to the last one. Now, there is a countdown timer on Law Hub and on Prometric on test day. You can click that countdown timer to make it go away. I highly recommend this because seeing that ticking timer is kind of stressful. I'm thinking of the TV show 24. If anyone remembers the ticking time bomb, very stressful to have that in front of you. We want to make that go away. You can get rid of it until the last 5 minutes of the section. But when that is displaying, of course, at the last 5 minutes, when you can't make it go away, it is somewhat stressful. You've got to have your own internal sense of rhythm. I think that stress and anxiety on the LSAT come from the uncertainty or the fear of knowing that things are not going to go well. And the way you avoid that is by working on your pacing such that you are comfortable with the time constraint and you are confident that things will go well. And so imagine if, like I said, you do 10 exams timed before the big day. If you had done 10 exams or 10 sections of reading comp in your case, Ashley, and you're at a place now where you know that you can and will complete the section, maybe with even a minute or 2 to spare, then you wouldn't be stressed by the time you got to the final passage, because you would know that you would be able to complete this section. And so I think your stress now is actually warranted, because you know that you're going to run out of time, because you know that 6 minutes is not enough time to finish the final passage. And so we need to work on your pacing earlier in the process to ensure that you will not run out of time by the end. And so let's think about, are there places on those first 3 passages where you can shave off time? Is it possible that you're spending more than 3 minutes on your initial read of each passage? Is it possible that you are going back to the text too much? Is it possible that you're getting bogged down in the details? If we can speed you up on those other 3 passages, then when you get to the 4th, you will have enough time remaining to be able to tackle it smoothly. So I'm not sure if that addresses your question, but I think that ultimately pacing comes down to moving at a reasonable pace throughout so that you have a minute or two by the end of the section. You're not finishing so early that you were rushing, but you're at a reasonable pace where you have maybe 30 seconds to a minute and a half at least, so that you have the confidence and security of knowing that you can and will complete the section with a little bit of time to spare to go back and tackle anything that you flagged or skipped earlier in the process. So I hope that was helpful. Yeah, keep working on pacing. Now, Leilani's asking, I just found out I have to take my LSAT by June 2026 and have no experience. What should I do to start? Okay, so you just found out you have 9 months. That's fantastic, right? I mean, there are women who get pregnant and find out they have 9 months before they have their baby. Plenty of time to prep, right? So we've got 9 months. That is more than enough starting from scratch, right? So let's think about how could we set up, in contrast to those who have only 3 weeks till October, where they're going to be focusing on timed exams, review, and pacing, like I mentioned earlier. For someone taking it in June, you have an abundance of time. And so that means that theoretically, you could solve all 58 numbered exams from 101 to 158 in LSAC's Law Hub platform. I highly recommend getting it. People will say, should I read books on informal logic? Should I read The Economist? Should I read Scientific American to get better at reading? And if you had 2-3 years, if you were a college freshman or a high school senior, overambitious folks who do reach out to me from time to time, I'd say, yeah, sure. In that case, years, read other stuff. But when you have less than a year, there's no reason to go beyond LSAT specific material itself. Now, I have this laser approach to LSAT prep. It's the framework that we use to create personalized study plans for our students inside the LSAT Unplugged community. And LASER is an acronym standing for Learning, Accuracy, Sections, Exams, and Review. I alluded to a bit of it earlier in this live stream today, focusing on the latter stages for those taking it in October. But for someone who has more than a few months, I would say you build the foundation first. So L is for the learning phase, where you might read textbooks, you might watch video courses to get the foundation, to get the fundamentals, to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. And there's a temptation to take a cold timed diagnostic. You can do one on LSAC's Law Hub platform for free. You just create an account on lsac.org. You'll get access to 4 different exams. You could take one of those free ones, see where you stand, but take the results with a big grain of salt, because all it's going to tell you is that you have not yet learned the language of the LSAT, but you can. You're going to see that logical reasoning has a grab bag of a whole bunch of different question types. You've got strengthen, weaken, flaw, necessary assumption, sufficient assumption, parallel, resolve, must be true, and so on. Then you've got reading comprehension with natural science, social science, humanities, and law passages. You'll also find that the time constraint of the LSAT is unreasonable, meaning that this test is designed such that most people will not be able to complete the questions in the time allotted. That is by design. It is unreasonable. And so you've got to do unreasonable things to build up your pacing, your speed, your endurance, to be able to tackle all the questions with ideally a couple of minutes to spare. Now, let's say hypothetically you want to score a 170 or a 175, as so many students do, to get into a T14 law school, or to go to a lower ranked school with significant scholarship money, maybe a full ride. The LSAT's the biggest determinant of any of those outcomes, scholarships or admissions or both. And so you think to yourself, okay, I want to get a top score. I can only afford to get a few questions wrong. That means I've got to get a solid overview of all those different types. You don't want to burn through valuable practice material doing exam after exam after exam, because all that does is measure your results, but it doesn't teach you the material. And so a lot of students will pursue a textbook or a course. We have one, by the way, LSATunplugged.com. We have a community with comprehensive on-demand courses, personalized study plans. You can check out the links below this video to find out more. I'm also offering free LSAT tutoring lessons, by the way, unpluggedprep.com/start. Link below this video as well. If you want to connect with me personally for a one-on-one, I'm happy to talk you through the process. But the idea here is you build a foundation before doing tons of exams. You build the foundation, you understand How do I strengthen an argument? How do I weaken an argument? How do I identify the flaw within an argument? Then once you've done that and you have the lay of the land, then you move on from the L phase in laser for learning to the A phase for accuracy. Accuracy is where you're drilling questions by type to better understand the proper perspective from which to view each section and each question type. And so you might do several flaw questions in a row. You might do several must be true questions in a row. Once you've done that for each of the types, you do the same for reading comprehension. Then you work on individual sections to work on your pacing. Like Ashley was asking, what do I do? I'm stressed, I'm running out of time. Pacing and working on individual sections is how you get to a point where you are not going to run out of time because you've developed your own internal rhythm. Kind of like someone who runs marathons will have an internal rhythm. So they say, I want to complete each mile in X number of minutes. So I'm running at an 8-minute mile pace, or a 9-minute mile pace, or a 7-minute mile pace. And they are remarkably consistent where it's almost subconscious or internal. They will just run at the same pace throughout for all 26 miles within a certain margin of error, but they're pretty much there. They're pretty much consistent without even trying because they've done it so many times. And that's why, for myself, for example, when I do individual logical reasoning sections, I consistently finish at approximately 32 minutes. And I like 32 minutes because it's not so fast that I'm rushing and getting things wrong because I'm not giving them due consideration, but I'm also not going so slow that I'm getting stressed that I'm too close to the wire. And so with 32 minutes, I have the security and comfort of knowing that I'm going to be able to go back to any questions that I flagged or skipped earlier in the section. So I recommend that you work on pacing and time management sooner rather than later. There are far too many students who get stuck in the drilling phase for far too long, where they just love drilling questions on their phone when they're in line for coffee, or they're in the bathroom, or in line for a sandwich, whatever. And they're like, I can get them right, doing them bit by bit here and there, a question here, a question there. But the problem is that this is also giving you immediate feedback on whether you got it right or wrong. And that's not what's going to happen on test day, right? On test day, you're going to do all 4 sections with no feedback. Then you're going to have to wait 2 to 3 weeks to get your score back. Totally artificial situation to be doing individual questions bite-sized here and there. Now, of course, doing a single question is better than doing nothing at all. But at a certain point, as test day gets closer, you want to move into timed work because it's not enough to get them right. You got to get them right under test day conditions. So Leilani, back to your question here. You're taking it 9 months from now. If you want to spend a couple months just working on foundation, that's fine. If you want to spend a couple months just working on drilling questions, that's also fine. But by the time you're at, say, January or February, where the exam's 5 months out or so, you're going to want to start working on timed sections, because after timed sections, you've got to still work on full-length exams to build up your endurance and also review your mistakes in depth. And so back to that laser approach, learning, accuracy, sections, exams, and review. If you had 9 months, maybe you spend 2 months on learning, building foundation, 2 months on accuracy, drilling sections, 2 months on accuracy, drilling by type, the next 2 months on individual sections, then another 2 months on exams and endurance. And then, of course, you are reviewing throughout the entire process. Now, you may not even need to take it in June. You could maybe go for April. Then you have June as a backup. But regardless, the thing I love about the June exam is that if you're applying next fall, approximately a year from now, you've still got backups. Like I said earlier, I love when students retake the LSAT because there's no reason not to. And so if you target June, you've got next August as a backup in case you have a bad proctor or a tech issue, whatever, and you can still apply at the very beginning of the cycle in the fall. Or maybe you go for April as your first take, then you have June as your backup, then you spend all summer working on your application essays. Then you're still applying the second apps open in September. But overall, I think folks worry too much about applying early. Better to apply in November or January with a higher score than to apply in October with whatever score you get if you feel like 3 weeks is not enough to achieve your fullest potential. Now, I see a question here from Ruth, and please feel free, folks, to keep the questions coming. I'll go for a bit longer. Is there a best way to increase speed without sacrificing accuracy? So the question increased speed without sacrificing accuracy. I'm to the point where I'm getting around 17 questions right for each logical reasoning section, but I have 6 or 7 unanswered but filled in, meaning that you're only attempting 17 and you're guessing randomly on the other 7 or 8 or so if there's 25 questions a section. And so it sounds like, yes, indeed, there is a pacing issue here, Ruth. And so we do need to increase your speed. Now, for a lot of students, it's possible that you could increase your speed on the easier questions without losing accuracy at all. And like I said earlier, I recommend that you complete the first 10 questions in roughly 10 to 12 minutes to build up a time bank that you can then apply to the tougher questions later in the section. So a lot of students who are capable of scoring 165, 170, and beyond, they're getting bogged down and stuck on the easier ones, second guessing themselves, double checking, triple checking, when there's really no reason to do so. Question number 3 is not going to be doubly right because you double checked and triple checked it. You've got to trust your gut. If you're the kind of student where you've already been through foundational material, you already have a general sense of the different question types in logical reasoning, for example, you know what is strengthen and weaken. You know the difference between sufficient assumption and necessary assumption. You understand weaken versus flaw and must be true versus most strongly supported. In that case, you can probably afford to speed up on those first 10 questions and trust your gut on them. And I do like when students go through all 5 choices just in case, but, and I say this with some hesitation, if you have a prephrase or a prediction for a given choice and you find that a choice matches your prediction perfectly, you might be able to just pick it and move on. And it might be a rational thing to do because you need to move on to other questions later that truly deserve and need that time. For anyone who's aiming for 165 and above, you're going to have to complete the entire section. You cannot afford to leave points on the table. If you're struggling to go from 140 to 150 and you'd be happy with a 150, different story. Don't even bother with the hardest ones, but I really don't love even talking about that because it's not worth aiming for a 150. The law school is worth going to. You want to have a 160 or better, especially if you want scholarship money, possibly even a full ride, or you want to go T14, for example. And so I recommend speeding up on the easier ones, trusting your gut, spending more time on the tougher ones that truly need that time. And if you find that you are consistently able to get all the easy questions right, but you consistently struggle on the tougher ones, maybe what you want to do is spend more time on tough questions only, meaning that you take some random old logical reasoning section and you do only the second half of the section. That's it. You just say, I'm going to take prep test number 120, and I'm going to do questions 15 through 25 in that section. And it's okay to spoil that section because you were never going to do prep test 120 as a full exam anyway. Maybe you need to spend more time only on the hardest questions. And then this ties in with Ashley's next question here about reviewing wrong answers. And so when you get a question wrong, or you have difficulty with a question and you're feeling stuck and you're like, well, I could have solved this more efficiently, but I went too slow, or I was guessing between 2 and I got lucky, but maybe it could have gone the other way. Those are all candidates for reviewing in depth. And I have a framework that I use with my students called the Socratic review method. And if you want me to walk you through this personally, check out the links below. I'm offering free LSAT tutoring lessons, unpluggedprep.com/start. You can book a free call with me. I'm happy to walk you through this. But the Socratic review method framework, which we use in our coaching with our students, is where we ask you a series of guiding questions to help you get to the root cause of exactly the mistakes you're making and why. So we ask you, for example, was it in the stimulus, meaning the argument? Was it in the question stem? Or was it in the choices, meaning was it a tempting wrong answer or an unappealing right answer? And I'm going to walk you through all of this. And so, for example, in a stimulus, let's say you have an argument. Arguments have both conclusions and evidence. But there are ways LSAT makes arguments more difficult. For example, they might not include clear indicator words for the conclusion like thus, therefore, so, and hence. They might not include clear indicator words for evidence like because and since. It's nice when they do, but one of the ways they increase the difficulty of an argument is that they don't include those words. They might also include sub-conclusions, meaning rather than evidence and conclusion, they have this evidence supports this conclusion, and this conclusion in turn supports a bigger or main conclusion. They might include annoying words like unless, except, until, and without. If it's a question stem, they might use an unfamiliar word or phrase to refer to a common question type. And so because they use the unfamiliar phrasing, you're not as likely to recognize the wording. You might have tricky answer choices with tempting wrong answers where the first half of the choice looks really good, but the second half is where they go astray. Or they might have an unappealing right answer where they use the worst wording in the world, but it is still technically correct. But they've heavily paraphrased and rewritten it to make it difficult to recognize. And so when you are reviewing your mistakes, you want to get to the root cause of exactly what led you to make that mistake so that you can avoid it the next time around. This is remarkably simple, but almost nobody does it. And that's why students' scores stay low, because they take test after test, but they don't get to the root cause of the mistakes they're making. And so they make those mistakes next time around, which is why, since you only have 58 numbered practice tests in Law Hub, 101 through 158 in the new format, there are fewer of them than they used to be because LSAC removed logic games. And so we went from 94 exams with logic games to 58 without. And you'd be surprised, but you will burn through those faster than you think. And so if you have 9 months, like Leilani does, you might get through all of them. If you have only 3 weeks till October, you're going to want to focus on the most recent, newest ones, say exams 140 to 158, or maybe only 150 to 158. And if you're somewhere in the middle, aiming for November, January, February, you might want to go through, say, 130 to 158. But regardless, I highly encourage you, rather than taking exam after exam after exam, you slow down, you do fewer exams, and review them in more depth. And by the way, when you are engaging in your review process, don't just look at the answer key. Say to yourself, oh, I get it now. How could I have been so dumb? Because if you do that, you're going to take another exam and make the same mistake again over and over. Instead, what you want to do is slow down, articulate your thought process in a mistake journal or a notebook, an error log, whatever you want to call it. It could be a physical moleskin notebook. It could be a Google Sheet. It could be a Google Doc. Doesn't matter, as long as you get it out of your head and document it in some way with notes. And if you really want to level up, you talk it through with a study buddy or with a coach and expert, someone who understands the LSAT deeply, who can help you get to the root cause of the mistakes in your process. Because the LSAT is not a test of knowledge or memorization or cramming. It's a test of skills and pattern recognition and your process for dissecting and analyzing arguments. And one thing I love about review documents like Google Sheets and Docs is that you can have a repeatable copy-paste template where you engage in this process over and over, where you have a column for the stimulus analysis, a column for the question stem, and a column for the tempting wrong answer and the unappealing right answer. You document for each of those columns where your misunderstanding stemmed from so that you can avoid making the same mistake again. Now, I'm going to include a link here in the comments to book a free LSAT tutoring lesson with me. I encourage all of you to join me for this. It'd be a lot of fun if we could connect. That's unpluggedprep.com/start. That's what I get for typing live here. And so I encourage and welcome all of you to book a free tutoring lesson with me. I'm happy to answer any questions like this on our one-on-one calls and walk you through ways I might be able to support you if you'd like. Thank you all for joining. It was a pleasure and hope to reconnect with you soon. Have a good one all.